Hello. Today is March 19th, 2024. This is episode 9 of the Pirate Chronicles. Chicago. What's going on with Chicago? Now, Chicago's been in the news. People are getting shot. Things are really a mess. The minority black community is out of control. There are daily shootings. There are murders. There are rapes. And there are robberies. And the local government just whistles by the graveyard. Something has to be done. So I thought I'd do a segment on Chicago. You notice I've got my Chicago Cubs hat. I actually grew up in Chicago. My great-grandfather was a Jew who immigrated from Latvia in the 1890s, I believe. Came here penniless and was able to build a very profitable business that expanded nationwide and created a foundation for my grandfather's family and my great-grandfather, by extent my father's. But I asked the question, and I went to Grok because I wanted to get a unbiased opinion, because everyone will say, oh no, you're just biased because that's a Democrat stronghold. Well, I asked Grok, how did Chicago get so corrupt? So I'm going to go into that for a few minutes. Chicago's history of corruption can be traced back to the late 19th century, when a gambling house owner named Michael Cassius McDonald created the city's first political machine. The city's large immigrant population made it easier for political machines to grow in power. In exchange for political support, ethnicities would be given virtual fiefdoms within city government. The Irish, for example, were given police work, and the Italian jobs at the transit authority. Now, that's one of the things I loved about Chicago, is that it was diverse. There were communities. You wanted Greek food, you went to Greek Town. You wanted the Italian food, you went to the Italian section of Chicago, and were for pizza, where they became famous for that. But Chicago changed. Over time, the political culture in Chicago became entrenched, leading to a one-party system that made it even more vulnerable to corruption. The weak campaign finance laws in Illinois probably helped to stave off competition in recent years. In the 1930s and 60s, the New Deal and the Great Society gave the Democratic Party access to new funds and programs for housing, slum clearance, urban renewal, and education, through which to dispense patronage and maintain control of the city. Patronage, money. The government was giving money. The political environment in Chicago in the 1910s and 20s let organized crime flourish to the point that many Chicago policemen earned more money from payoffs than from the city. On December 9th, 2023, WTTW.com ran with this headline, Four-Peat Chicago ranks number one in corruption, reports find. For the fourth year in a row, Chicago is America's most corrupt city, and Illinois is the third most corrupt state, according to a new report from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Migration. In the 1960s, many African Americans relocated to Chicago as part of the Great Migration, a long-term movement of black people from the South to the urban North. The primary reasons for this migration included escaping racial violence, pursuing economic and educational opportunities, and obtaining freedom from the oppression of Jim Crow laws. We can look back and see that everything they said that they were escaping from the South, they were just going to get it 10 times worse in Chicago. During World War I and II, the need for industrial labor in the North increased, and factories opened their doors to black workers, providing opportunities to black Southerners eager to stake their claims to full citizenship through their role in the industrialized economy. However, the Great Migration was also driven by the invention of the mechanical cotton picker towards the end of the 40s, which provided a push from the South that outlasted the expansion of Chicago's job market. Little did they know, the blacks from the South, that Chicago was building a plantation, that Chicago was building prisons, that they were determined to build a plantation. And Chicago, at that time, became the biggest plantation in the country. There was a place called Cabrini Green. I remember it because my grandparents used to drive us past it, and show it to us. At first, they thought it was a sign about how wonderful they are, how compassionate they are to the black people. Cabrini Green was a public housing project in the near north side of Chicago, Illinois, United States. It was composed of the Francis Cabrini row houses and the William Green homes, which were built in the 1940s, and the Cabrini Green extension, which was built in the 1950s and 60s. The complex was named after Francis Xavier Cabrini, the first American citizen to be canonized as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. Why do I get the feeling that the government in Chicago may have bribed somebody to give Cabrini sainthood? Cabrini Green was originally built to provide affordable housing for working class families, but over time it became known for its poverty, crime, and gang activity. The complex was the site of several high-profile incidents, including the 1970 shooting of 2 police officers and the 1992 murder of a 7-year-old boy, Dantrell Davis. Now, if you were to go by Cabrini Green and the parts of the city of Chicago, you would say that's a slum. By the time I saw it in 67, 68, it was a slum. They had taken, and don't get me wrong, this was never a beautiful place. These were utilitarian buildings built in straight square concrete with high density housing. Sometimes, 20 floors, maybe 50 apartments on each level. It was big. It was not nice. It was not designed well. And it became an eyesore. I spent a lot of time in Chicago, especially in the 60s, with my grandparents who were dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. They thought that by taking their grandchildren out to experience the poverty, out to mingle with the black community, we would have more sympathy for them. So we'd go on a Friday or a Saturday, and my grandparents would put us in the car and go in search of the best, what I could call dive burger joints in the city. One of these places was called Chances Are. We went in, and we were the only white people there. Um, what we loved about it, though, was that you could take peanuts and crack them and throw the shells on the floor. To an 8-year-old kid, that was fun. That was cool. Um, they also drove us around and showed us a lot of the poverty, thinking that just the exposure to it would make us kinder people, not seeing the destruction that was being caused. In 1968, my grandparents, who I said were very much into politics, local politics, um, took us to the Chicago Democratic National Convention. We first went there, and they took us to a protest with Georges Pompidou, the president of France. We were sitting on the sidewalk, and my grandparents encouraged us to include the chants, "Poo poo Pompidou." That I guess they didn't like Pompidou for some reason. But then they took us to the 1968 Democratic National Convention. I remember going into the Hubert Humphrey headquarters and getting posters of Hubert Humphrey, who I was told was going to be the next president of the United States. But the 68 convention is much more famous for something else. The 1968 Chicago riots were a series of violent clashes between police and protesters during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, Illinois. The riots were sparked by a number of factors, including the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. earlier that year, the ongoing Vietnam War, and the growing tension between the city's African American community and the predominantly white police force. The people realized that they were being manipulated, that they were being controlled. In the days leading up to the convention, thousands of anti-war demonstrators and civil rights activists had gathered in the city to protest against the Vietnam War and the policies of the Democratic Party. On the night of August 28, 1968, a large group of protesters marched towards the convention site, but they were met by a massive police presence. Now the question's coming, with the convention's coming this August in Chicago. Does Chicago still have a massive police presence? I don't know. They wanted to eliminate the police department. They wanted to be compassionate. But in Chicago, there were massive police. They also called in the National Guard. As the protesters attempted to move forward, the police began to use force to disperse the crowd. The situation quickly escalated, and the violence broke out between the protesters and the police. Over the next few days, the violence continued, with police using tear gas, clubs, and other weapons to subdue the protesters. The police actions during the riots were widely criticized, with many accusing the police of using excessive force and violating the civil rights of the protesters. The riots also had a significant impact on the outcome of the Democratic National Convention, with many delegates expressing their outrage at the police response to the protests. Even back then, they were anti-police. They encouraged the protesters. This year, they're already planning for Antifa, Black Lives Matter, the local community to rise up. We're going to see, I believe that we're going to see riots like we've never seen before. There will be Democratic riots, which are going to be protesting the war in Palestine. There's going to be Jewish protesters protesting the Palestinians and Hamas for starting the war. Then there's going to be the Democrats who are just there to say, Trump bad, we can't have him. The people are waking up. We know it's organized. We know that over the years, the government of Chicago gathered their base, and their base was the black people. They put them in housing. They gave them welfare. They taught them that they don't have to work, that if they stay in their public housing in Cabrini Green, they will get a check every month. They will get food stamps. And that's exactly what happened. And they got lazy. Black fathers started leaving their wives, the mothers of their children, and went out and learned how to deal drugs, learned how to commit crimes. And it became the way in Chicago. And this was a government who often said, vote early, vote often. They were all for cheating. They were all for crimes. And the people, not being stupid, saw that. So they joined in and they became part of the crime. It exists to this day. Everyone said, oh, no, Chicago isn't that bad anymore. Just there's shootings in the black community. But when I was last there a few years ago, I went to go shopping on Michigan Avenue. Now, Michigan Avenue was the gem of Chicago. High-end stores. Very nice. But after the convention I was at, meetings were over, I went out to do some shopping at about 8 o'clock. And I saw right down the street, there was about 100, maybe 200 black people rioting. They were going into stores and breaking the windows and stealing whatever they could. And guess what? There's not a policeman in sight. I got scared. How could this town where I grew up become that much worse? And it's from decades of Democratic rule. And the thing is, right now, the people are starting to wake up. The blacks are tired of being shot. I believe, though they're not, always the person doing the shooting. But most don't like it. They don't like the gangbangers. They actually want more police. And now the convention, for some reason, they chose to have it in Chicago again. I'm sure it has something to do with Barack Hussein Obama. And it's going to get ugly. Chicago, Illinois is going to have to call in the National Guard. I'm sure it's going to happen beforehand. They're going to blame it on ultra right-wing MAGA people protesting. But I'll guarantee you there's not going to be any MAGA people in sight, because you don't stop an enemy when they're destroying themselves. And the Democratic Party is destroying itself. They've created a plantation, tried to put all the blacks on their side, but now the blacks in America are waking up. They see that the Democratic National Party is not the party of Abraham Lincoln. He was a Republican. The Republicans freed the slaves. The Democrats put the blacks in housing complexes. They put them on welfare. The Democrats were the Ku Klux Klan. Joe Biden was close friends with a wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, who was the mentor of Hillary Clinton. Look up Robert Byrd, Byrd. He was a Klansman. The Nazis in Skokie were Democrats. It's all a lie. And it makes me cry that the Chicago that I loved, that I grew up in as a child, going to Wrigley Field, going to the museums, going to Soldier Field to see the Bears. It was all idyllic. It was separated, even though there were riots going on at the convention. Chicago, for the most part, was a peaceful city. You could go there. You could go to the museums. You could go to the Art Institute. You could go eat to your heart's content. Go eat pizza. Go have Greek food. Go to Ditka's Steakhouse. But no more. If you go to Chicago and you're not black, or even if you are black, you are risking your life. You're more likely to get shot. You're more likely to get robbed. You're more likely to get carjacked. And it's a very, very sad state of affairs. What they're going to do, I don't know. But trouble is coming to Chicago again. And I encourage Democrats not to take it anymore. Look in the mirror. Look at what welfare has done for you. Look what public housing has done for you. Look what their greatest education system in the world, which they claimed failed the black community. Most blacks in Chicago can't even pass basic reading. Math, forget about it. They're 70% is not proficient in reading, in math, in writing. How are these people going to survive? And everyone says, well, it's hard, it's difficult. No, it isn't. Asians come to this country, Indians from all over the world, from extreme poverty. They are able to make a life. They don't let themselves be put into community government housing. They don't rely on a government check. They go out, they get educated, they educate their children, they go start businesses. It can be done. And I'm encouraged that many in the black community are rolling or starting to understand that things were better under Trump. And they were. And they will be again. So let's pray for Chicago. Let's pray that Satan is removed from that one great city. Let's pray that there aren't massive riots and there is not much loss of life or policemen injured. But it's coming. It's coming fast by design by the Democrats. I'm not sure what we can do, if anything, to stop it. But watch. Pay attention. Look to alternate media for the news from the convention, because the media, the mainstream media, will not be talking about the riots. They will say, oh, things are mostly peaceful here. While there's a potential for another Chicago fire. Have any of you heard of Mrs. O'Leary's cow? There may be a few cow incidents in Chicago. I hope not. These are the Pirate Chronicles. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Jack O'Malley.